One of the things I try and do on this channel is to make things as sustainably as possible. That means using as many recycled materials as possible. And recently my parents remodelled their kitchen, so I said to them, don't throw away any of that wood, give it to me and I'll do something of a scrap wood challenge. And so, ladies, gentlemen and all variations thereupon, that's what we're going to do today. We're going to try and build something with this scrap wood that's a little bit more modern, a little bit cyberpunkish maybe. I'm not entirely certain. We're just going to build as we go. I think I want to make a dressing table and a stool to go with it, but we'll see. I'm not entirely certain of the quality of all the wood. But let's go through, see what we've got and see what we can do with it. So this is the wood that we've got. It's very cheap chipboard, and as you can see it's been used in the kitchen and it's got oily splats all the way around it. It's not even perfectly square, it's got chunks cut out. So it's not ideal wood to be using, but if we're going to be sustainable about things, we need to be able to use the worst quality materials. There's no point in just saying, oh, that's too bad, we're going to have to throw it away. If we can use it, let's use it. So the way we're going to cut this is we're going to have to first deal with this top corner. Because it's got a chunk taken out of it, I can't just have it as a square. So I'm going to have to slope it and angle it. And the way I want it is I want this bit to be the bottom, which means that I can't create too much of a slope. So if there's too much slope on this, then as I put something heavy at the top, it'll tip forward. So we want only a slight angle going up, but an obvious angle. So probably starting about here to here, drawing along that line. So let me get myself a ruler, that sort of angle I suppose. Then I'm just going to get a protractor out and check the angle, basically 78-degree angle. And the reason I've measured the angle on it is so I can transfer it across accurately to the other one. So I'm going to do the same on the other. So also has a chunk taken out of it, and as you can see it's in worse condition. So the way this has been set up is I've clamped down using G-clamps the wood to my bench. I have got a vise, but if I put it in the vise it's going to be raised up too high for me to do an accurate cut. So I've clamped it down and I've clamped on this metal ruler as well, just to give me a slight guidance as I'm sawing along. So I know I'm not going to wobble too far that way. There's still a danger I can come this side, but this is the side that's going to be removed. So worst case scenario, I just take a little bit extra off. So now there's nothing left to do but cut. Actually, this is going to be quite loud. Editor Bridget, can you put on some sort of industrial sounding music or something? Yeah, that works. Now that we've got two of these pieces cut, which are going to be the sides of the dressing table, we also need to do the sides of the stool. And the sides of the stool are going to be the inverse of the dressing table. By that I mean the dressing table is going to have the wide top and a narrow bottom. The stool needs to have a wide bottom and narrower top. The reason I'm doing it that way around is because on the dressing table you want a large area on the top in order to place things, to be able to put your makeup and your lotions and potions and actually use it as a dressing table. But relative to the weight that the stool's going to take, it's not going to take that much weight on top of it, so it can afford to be slightly unbalanced. The stool, on the other hand, see, I'm going to weigh a lot more than foundation. I'm never going to earn that much makeup. So when I'm sitting on it, I want it to have a larger, firmer base. But my backside isn't that big, so I can afford to have a smaller section on the top. So what we're going to do is take this smaller section of wood, which is about the right height for a stool, and I'm going to use the edge of this in order to make an exact inverse of this angle onto there, and I'm just going to do that by placing it on top and drawing a line. The next step will be to try and attach the top of the dressing table to the side of the dressing table. Now ideally we would want to do this with some sort of mechanical joint, like a dovetail joint or mortise and tenon or something like that. But as this already has a good deal of holes in from where it was previously attached using dowels, I thought it's going to be easiest just to find a drill bit that's the right size, that just about squeezes in, and that one's the 8mm, and then drill corresponding holes onto the side of what will be the top, and then just reuse the dowels to reattach it. And the reason I'm doing it that way is A, it's going to save me a lot of cutting, because otherwise I would use the dovetail and would have had to cut some off, and that's a lot of cutting to do. The other reason is by using dowels into the side, it means I save myself that little bit of extra space at the side of it. So what I would cut off I've now gained as a surface to use. The easiest way to do that is to place the top on top of the side, and then I'll just mark on exactly where the holes line up, make sure the edges are aligned, and then I'll go over this again when it's on off camera and don't have to worry about getting it on film so it's more accurate. But basically that's what it is. We're going to mark on where we're going to drill a hole exactly in the centre of each of these where I've just marked, and then it'll just be a case of putting the dowel in and using wood glue to make sure it stays secure. So let's do a whistle stop tour of where we've got so far. This is the top, and it's secured and glued on each side just with dowels and wood glue. Now if I were to just do that, because this is not very thick in sort of its depth, just using dowels it would cause quite a bit of a wobble, because the wood will want to flex like that. So underneath we've added in a support, which I've had to cut the wood there and I've not cut it perfectly straight, so there's a slight gap there, but the dowels reach across, so it should be fine. And this is there to stop that sort of flex at the top, because it's positioned vertically. It's got more distance, so the wood itself will stop the flex. Down this side, this is just the bottom. If I put too much weight at the top without anything supporting the bottom, then the two legs, the two sides, will try and bow outwards and spread. So in order to stop that, we've got another piece situated sort of like a mini version of what we've got at the top, just horizontally laid out and again doweled and glue. The glue is just PVA, but it's really strong PVA, it's wood glue. And obviously you want to keep it pressed together tight enough that the wood glue smears out like that. And in order to do that, we're going to pile on scrap wood just to press down on the joints, we'll give them time to set. And after a night of leaving it to dry, this is where we're at. We've got quite a stable surface. Certainly it's strong enough that I'd be willing to use it as a dressing table because it's not going to take that much weight. It's just going to be the weight of my makeup and such. But when I woke up this morning, I thought of an issue that could potentially come up in future. You see, because I've just used dowels in order to stick this together, dowels and structural beams, there is a very slight wobble to it. And if this was regular wood, that wouldn't be an issue. But because it's chipboard, chipboard, if you don't know, is made of pieces of scrap wood, little chips of wood, and sawdust that have been compressed and glued together. And it's very prone to tearing apart. You could tear bits of it off with just your fingers. It doesn't require that much force. So if this wobbles later on in the year when I'm moving it, or even when I'm taking it through into my bedroom, there's a chance that the dowel could start pulling away at some of the chips of wood, which would lead to the dowel coming loose, which would lead to the whole thing eventually collapsing. So to avoid that, what I'm going to do is add in some nails to the side. Not very many, just a few each side, just to try and minimise that shake and try and hold it more firmly in place. So I've got my nails here, I've got my hammer. It's hammer time. And now we come to the actual stool. So what I've done here is I've marked on the area we're going to cut off. We need this to be slightly narrower than the actual dressing table because we want it to be able to slide under the front when we're not in use the same space in the room. So I've marked on a section we're going to cut off, and then this area here is going to be the start of a dovetail joint, the male section. So we're going to cut this area out, an area out here, and anything this side of the ruler that I've attached down is also going to be sawn off. We're going to then create corresponding cut on the top of the chair legs, the stool legs, the female part for this dovetail joint, and then when it all slots in, it will be slightly narrower than the dressing table, and it should be a corresponding shape as well because we'll have the legs sloped. But let's get to cutting. And with that cut out, we need to make the opposing joint on the leg. So let's line it up so the edge of the leg is level with the edge of the seat, and then mark on where we need to cut out. I think I've gone too deep on one side, which is going to be a problem. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Right, so another thing we need to keep in mind is the depth. So we need to measure how deep we're going to go, which I already have a faint line planned out there. And that looks about right to me. So what we're going to do now is cut that section out so that that can slot into it. You can see here one of the dangers of working with chipboard. You see, as I was removing that section from there, it's broke off more than I intended. So we've ended up with a ugly gap. But I can save that piece, and what I'm going to try and do is remove some of the excess where this is sitting and reinsert that with PVA. Now, because this isn't going to be 100% secure because I'm going to be gluing this back in, I'm going to install a crossbeam in the middle as well, and to do that it's just going to be a case of cutting a beam to the right size, which is going to be the same as the distance of the seat, and then just tacking it and gluing it. I'm not going to do any fancy joints for it because it's just there to prevent it wobbling from side to side and relieve the strain on this. I've done something very silly. I'm so focused on actually getting it together, I forgot to check the sides that I was nailing and gluing things together. So I'm sitting on the stool, it works, and this is the dressing table in front of me, just slightly out of camera view, but there we are. So that's the dressing table, and everything seems to work. It's stable enough, I can put weight on it, it would work, except I measured the wrong angles when I wrong sides when I was planning it out. I was assuming that length was going to be the width, and then I forgot to check it while I was putting it together, and so the stool is actually wider than the dressing table, so I can't put it underneath, and a lot of that effort was for naught, but I've got it together now. Everything works. I've got a dressing table, I've got the stool, now I've just got to build a mirror section on the front, and I've got space for everything, so no harm, no foul, I guess. Or all's well that ends well, as the bard would say. These mirrors are going to be what we actually use for the dressing table, because obviously we're going to need something that reflects. These are just pieces of acrylic that I've put a reflective film on, and if you want to see how to make these, Editor Bridget, can you put a little thing in the top corner just to link to that video? Because for Halloween I made a haunted mirror, and I used one of these, and actually this one here is the mirror out of that build. I'm reusing it. I've just been puzzling through how I'm going to install them, and I came across this interesting idea. You see, some of these pieces of wood, they were supposed to have a backing board or something placed inside them, and I don't have the backing board or anything with it, but it's almost the exact thickness of the mirrors. I just need to put a couple pieces of card there. If I show around the back, the black card is something that's got to be there because we need something dark in order to stop it reflecting, but these are just two pieces of the lid of a cereal box. That creates enough thickness that it wobbles, but it's fairly solid. So once I've glued that down into place, that might be enough. So what I might do is just cut sections of this out and use that, and might have to use two of them, to create a little runner that I can insert the mirrors in and have very thin, loose, almost freestanding mirrors. So that's going to be the next part of the build. Let's move on to that bit. Okay, so the mirrors are all done. They're not glued into the base yet, so they're still a little bit wobbly, but they're ready to be mounted. Now we've got to decide how we're going to mount them, and as I'm using scrap wood anyway, let's continue using the scrap wood that we've already cut off. Now this one's from the seat, but I've also got from the dressing table itself, and what I'm going to do is cut a section off the top to make it flat, and then mount this onto it, and then mount it onto the table and have the three mirrors facing me so that they're at the right height for me to be able to use. Now unfortunately the way I've got the camera mounted means I have to duck down a bit, so you might see me go out of frame while we're doing this, but there we go. So that's lined up at that height, then that is visible to me. Right, in order to attach this on, I'm going to use the same combination of wood glue and a nail to hold it in place, and probably will just be one nail. and I'm going to mount it this way around. I've decided I want the straight edge facing forwards, which means that I've got to mount it this way around because that way is the crappy side that we want to hide. So we'll have this side facing outwards. So you remember the reason I cut these angled pieces off was because there was this chunk missing out of some of the pieces of wood. Well, it just so happens that this is an almost perfect right angle and it's close enough match to the back of the dressing table that I can just hook this over the back. So in order to attach this to the top of the dressing table, what I'm going to do is drill in the hole for biscuits again and then just sit it on the back and glue it down. Because it's in two different directions, it'll be a lot more stable than just attaching sides-wise. So firstly, I don't know what this plastic covering is that this one's made out of, but it's a bugger to drill through. It took me longer to get through the plastic than it did to get through the wood. Because of the way this is set up, with two holes going in, it's actually impossible to slot both in. So as this isn't going to be taking any pressure going upwards because gravity is going to be holding it down, in order to get it in, I'm going to chip away at the top of this hole so that it can be slotted in there and then it'll rest in, and this hole will stop it moving side to side, and this hole will stop it moving back and forth and side to side. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to just cut out a small section of this so I can get a screw to go through, as I'm going to screw these directly into the top of the table. So now we come to the final stage. I've moved it into my living room simply because we're going to be doing some painting, and if we're going to paint it up, it's easier to get off the hardwood floors in here than it is to get off the carpet in my crafting room. The first thing we're going to want is to get ourselves some sandpaper and just go over the rough edges, because this chipboard, or MDF as it's sometimes called, or probably more commonly called, it tends to be rough along these edges. And if we're going to do anything like stick lights to it or sit on it, as we're going to do with this, we don't want anything rough that's going to catch onto tights or, you know, peel away the underneath the sticking of the LED lights and cause them to come away. So we need to smooth these sides out, and then we're going to cover it with a sealer and then paint it, except on these long exposed areas down here. For them, it's probably worth facing. Now, you can face it with something like a wood veneer. I've got an oak wood veneer that I could use, but I'm trying to keep this as cheap as possible, and I want to show you how to do it as cheaply as you can and with as many recycled materials as you can. So what I've got is some lining paper, and this lining paper can be cut to a thickness and length that's going to stick over the front of this, and then that becomes the surface on which to paint, so we don't need to really worry too much about smoothing. So the first thing for me to do is to smooth down the edges, and you can probably see from there, but got to clean up the edge of these because these are old recycled pieces of wood. They've been pre-loved. So what I have here is an LED strip, and this is with green, red, blue LEDs. You can pick these up relatively cheap. This one is a remote control one. It has the infrared system at the far end. And I'm going to run these around the back and the sides, use these to light up my face when I'm putting on makeup, and use it as a decorative thing otherwise. Now, when you're cutting these, I've said in previous videos, but I've only used white LEDs for it, you want to cut along the metal strip here. And for this, I'm going to leave on the first set of LEDs attached to the plug. And the reason I'm doing that is that then I've got these exposed, pre-labelled little metal pads. So I don't have to worry about the wires in this end. I know where to solder things up. And because the paint is still wet, I can't show me measuring up this, because it's a pain in the arse to try and film whilst you're measuring stuff, make sure everything's in shot and not get paint over yourself. So I'm just going to cut these up. Basically, I'm cutting these to size to where I want them. Once the paint's dry, I'll show you putting it on. It's going to be a little bit of a complicated setup, so I'll show you afterwards how exactly it's all wired together. But basically, I'm going to run it from the single plug onto separate strips of LED light, which means it's going to be slightly duller than it would be otherwise, but LEDs tend to be quite bright anyway, so hopefully I'll still have enough power flowing through. Now what I want to do is split the power 3 ways. So I'm not sure we're going to get enough power going through this in order to have a 3-way split, but we're going to give it a try. And in order to get the 3-way split, what I've done is I've twisted 3 blue wires around the blue wire that I just attached to the powered light. And I'm going to try and solder so that these 4 wires all stay clumped together, and that way I can use the 3 wires coming off there to transfer power equally between 3 different mirrored sections. So yeah, it looks like I've got the 3 soldered up, so I'm going to do that with the rest, and then we're going to test it to see if the power is dividing properly. I'm going to need to clip away the excess wire on there just to make sure nothing accidentally connects and nothing shorts, and then we're going to have to cover it with some sort of either a heat shrink or electrical tape, which is what I've got and what I'll use. It's always difficult to film and solder at the same time, so I didn't film that much of what I did last night, especially as when I finished it was 11 o'clock and I just had enough. So let me give you a rundown of what we've actually got. So what we've done is we've got the main cable that comes up here to a single LED strip which is underneath, and that's stuck on there. And I'm using just clear sticky tape because it's hard to see, just to secure wires in place. We've got 1 set of wires coming out of that LED, which then split into 3. And it's done that way round just simply so I can easily keep track of where everything is. And it goes onto 3 sections. One of it comes out here, which runs up this strip and comes out just on the right hand side of that mirror. Let me get it mirrored over this side if the camera focuses. That comes up and comes out on the left hand side. And the reason I've only done it on the one side of both of them is because they'll both reflect onto the middle mirror and towards my face. And the third one, it doesn't have any LEDs going up the centre, but it has a strip that goes all the way around at the top. So we've got lights on this side, all the way around the back and onto this side. Now my original intention was to solder onto one of these 2 strips here, solder the wires onto one of these 2 strips here. so that all these wires could be hidden. But like I say, it was 11 o'clock when I finished and I'd had enough. So when I realised I'd done it wrong, I just didn't correct it. So at the minute we've got wires here, I might correct it later, but at the minute I just want to get this done. All these wires are stuck down like that, and the idea is they'll light up the back behind it, but these lights at the sides here and here will create enough light facing forwards that I should be able to do my makeup, hopefully, by the light they produce, because they are quite bright. Dressing table constructed along with the stool, mirrors installed, lights installed. There's one more thing I want to do now, and that's to finish the paint job with some glow-in-the-dark paint, so when the lights go out there's an extra dimensionality to it, and this is where the cyberpunk element is going to come in. I'm going to try and do some sci-fi kind of designs and hopefully get a bit of a cyberpunk feel, although there's going to be a little bit of Star Wars in there as well, just to give a kind of high-tech and yet it's fairly common sort of like sort of thing a working class person would have in the future. That's the kind of feel I'm trying to go for. I'm not sure how easily you're going to be able to see this, but the first thing I want to set up is a sort of keyboard. And I've drawn out the design that I want, which is using the Star Wars alphabet with a little bit of alteration. And I'm using this little square of paper to give me the sort of consistent size for the keys. To start down here. And so, ladies, gentlemen, and all variations thereupon, there we have it. It's a dressing table. When the lights go out, you'll go a bit more cyberpunk. Now, there are a few things I've still got to do. These areas down the centre where it's a bit darker, these need another coat of paint and to have the splats cleaned up. I also need to adjust this wire so it's not entirely visible. But you don't really need to see me do that. I mean, do you need to see me do another coat of paint? I don't think so. And all in all, I think this has turned out pretty good, considering everything on here, or virtually everything, has been recycled somewhat. The mirror's been reused from a previous build that I've done on this channel. The wood used to be kitchen counters in my parents' house. Even the paint was leftovers from when my parents redecorated. So the entire build, except the glow-in-the-dark paint and the LEDs, was recycled. Now the LEDs, whilst I can't reuse the remote for the next build that I'm going to use the rest of the LEDs on because I haven't used them all, I do have Arduino computers, so those extra LEDs aren't going to go to waste, and I've brought one lot of LEDs that are going to go across multiple builds. Now something else about this is, because I've only got one point of contact on the mirrors, they rotate, so if a different person sits here or I have a different size stool, they can move the mirrors around in order to make it reflect them. So that's the build. I would show you the stool, and I might show it happening because I did have the camera recording, but I don't think it got a good shot. Turns out the MDF was a little bit more degraded than I originally thought. My joints held, but the wood itself was given away, and I went crashing down when I sat down to film this little outro. So there's the build, the finished product. All that's left now is to show it in its glory at different times during the day.